accepting people. Hi, everyone. We see lots of people joining us. Welcome to our August webinar. We'll give it a couple of more minutes and we will start. Fantastic. Hi, everyone. Make sure you are on mute so we can speak without any noise. Welcome to our August webinar. We we have lots of people checking in. We should start in about 2 minutes.
No.
Everything's okay, Mark?
Yeah, you have to approve me to share the screen.
Yes, I did.
There we go.
Mhm. Okay. Oh, perfect. All right, so people are going to be joining us. We already have most of the people. So, okay. All right. Welcome, everyone, to our August edition of our webinar series, War and Business Investing in Ukraine. So today, these series have been launched with partnership in collaboration with the Danish Industry Council and Brightbird Risk. And as always, our general sponsor of our events, of our webinars, Piraeus Bank in Ukraine. So today, as always, we're gonna start with Mark giving the war and economic outlook for Ukraine, and then we have a pleasure to we have two speakers join us today. We have Nicholas Hawtin, an expert on dual-use technologies, who designed and operates the first dual-use defense tech startup accelerator in the Nordics at the Technical University of Denmark Science Park. And we have a pleasure to have the second speaker, Deborah Fairlamb. Deborah spent almost 15 years of business development and investment experience in Ukraine. With an early Wall Street background, Deborah has successfully integrated Western practices into local ecosystems, driving a range of initiatives from foreign direct investments to support the growth of Ukraine's tech ecosystem. So, as a founding partner at the venture capital firm Green Flag Ventures, Deborah currently focuses on early stage dual use defense technology startups, leveraging her expertise to foster growth for Ukraine's defense and beyond. And why we have those experts? Because, as you know, Ukraine became the largest defense innovation hub and weapon production hub. So, I believe, Mark, I will give the stage to Mark McNamee, the co-founder of UBN. Mark, the stage is yours.
Great. Thank you very much. I will try to be a bit briefer than previous webinars in the interest of making sure we're time sensitive with the great speakers we have coming after me. And so I will give, typically, as usual, the geopolitical war outlook, delve into some of the economic trends, what we're seeing at the macro level, also at the micro level, what we're hearing from businesses. We'll let Rasmus then tackle the evolving security situation. And then we'll move to Nick and Deborah for their thoughts on everything developing here in the dual use economy of Ukraine. So, and of course, please do submit your questions throughout, and we'll try to get to them throughout our presentations. So, as far as the geopolitical and war outlook, so I was trying to create slides, but unfortunately, as the situation's so fluid, literally slides I started creating on Tuesday were completely irrelevant by yesterday. So I just decided I would more or less speak, shoot from the hip, as we say in the US. I'll try to keep some structure, of course, but just give you sort of my stream of consciousness thoughts almost on where we are and where things are moving. Very busy past month is the point. So a lot to update here. First and foremost, of course, is the summit tomorrow, as everybody is well aware. But more importantly is the lead up to the summit. And in a way, this past week is almost a microcosm of everything that has happened since Trump was inaugurated in January. So the last 8 months, 7, 8 months here, we've seen kind of everything. Trump talking about land swaps, seems like he's going to sell out to Putin. And then in the last 48, 24 hours, it seems like he's back to what has been the trend really since about April of a more consolidated West and rejoining and strengthening the partnerships with European allies as well as with Ukraine. So we're still in a positive trajectory, but as we'll say 20 times today and forever, it's still Trump. So let's see what actually happens going forward. As mentioned, right, we do have pretty good alignment of the Western world still today. And particularly, we should be encouraged by the last 24, 48 hours of comments coming out of Trump's mouth but the White House in general. And prior to that, right, I mean, Trump had initiated sanctions on India in order to pressure Russia. Sanctions also are being considered in the U.S. Senate on Chinese banks and organizations that are fueling Russia's war machine. EU is also looking to join those sanctions. EU also has lowered the oil price cap, which U.S. and U.K. look set to join going forward. And prior to that, of course, we had the U.S.-Ukraine minerals deal a couple of months ago now. And critically, 2 deals with the EU. We have the EU, more NATO nations, more or less, with U.S. Weapons deal, which is already moving, and we're seeing deposits made there to purchase U.S. weapons. And then, of course, the U.S.-EU trade deal, which obviously was quite tense, the talks for a few months. But this has been kind of sort of cosmetically resolved in a much better place. Trump is clearly pleased, sees this as a victory for him. And so the point being that this has definitely improved ties between U.S. and Europe and Ukraine then by proxy. So all of that has happened in the last 3 months, which is critical because that's not where we were, January, February, March at the beginning of the year when there was a lot more worry. So in a fairly good place with that. Plus, again, the comments Trump has made about severe consequences for Putin if he doesn't agree to a ceasefire tomorrow and things of this nature. We don't expect too much out of this summit. First and foremost, Putin himself retains his still maximalist demands. There's really nothing different from what was presented by the Kremlin to Ukraine and the Western world, the U.S. and EU leaders back in April. Nothing has really changed, and Putin has been consistent really since the onset of the full-scale invasion in 2022. So we're still at that point with Russia's maximalist demands, and also Putin rejected what Trump had offered him, which was quite lenient terms back in April. So Trump doesn't look set to necessarily offer anything beyond that. In which case the proposal would be rejected by Putin once again, and the West is again, the caveat of Trump is quite solidly in support of Ukraine as of where we're sitting today, right now at 3 p.m. Kyiv time. So let's see where this goes. But Putin's goal, of course, is the same: stall, delay, dangle shiny objects in front of Trump about economic partnerships and the Arctic and all sorts of different things. And obviously Putin would use this leverage to continue to stall and delay and create as much disunity as possible, like we saw several months ago between the US and EU, which has long been every Russian and Soviet dictator's goal, to split up that partnership. Again, positively, Trump has actually downplayed this at least first summit with with Putin tomorrow, saying that he's feeling him out. He also admitted some humility from Trump, which was impressive, that he's not in a position to actually make a deal tomorrow, and it's not up to him. Ukraine, with European partners, are the ones to fundamentally, in the decision-making capacity to make a deal. So that's also quite positive that from those words, we can assume and hope that Trump then wouldn't sell out Ukraine. And Ukraine isn't his to give. He actually can't. So he's actually correct in his assessment of his more humble position in influencing Ukraine. Nonetheless, and then also it's worth mentioning, talking about a potential summit next week between the three, which Trump has said is even more important, with Putin, Trump, and Zelensky meeting supposedly next week. I would be very surprised if this meeting were to occur. First and foremost, Putin would not agree to this. I don't see why he would agree to this. He's called Zelensky an illegitimate leader. He doesn't recognize him as the president of Ukraine. He doesn't recognize Ukraine's own sovereignty. He's called Ukraine a colony. This is the source of the war, that Ukraine has no sovereignty outside of Moscow. So why would he sit down at a table? It couldn't be more humiliating for Putin, from Putin's point of view, to sit down at the table and treat Zelensky as an equal, assuredly get lectured by Zelensky about war crimes and things, and then give Zelensky that type of credibility and legitimacy. So let's see. But that's what Trump is expecting and hoping for. That's what Ukraine wants. That's what the European allies are also sort of expecting and pushing for as well. So we'll see how that develops. But I would not hold your breath for a Putin-Zelensky meeting next week. Though, if there were, we could maybe see some more progress. Not anytime soon, but these are the steps that would be necessary in order to lay the groundwork for a potential ceasefire down the road. So, in short, don't expect too much out of tomorrow. I also, of course, there's the concern about Trump dumping Ukraine and siding with Putin, blaming Kyiv for the continued fighting. But I also don't think that would happen. And it's just hard to see how you're going to go from basically no progress for 6-7 months to then suddenly getting solid results just because Trump and Putin met. So and also you don't have Zelensky there or the European leaders there, which are their key stakeholders, to say the least, in terms of resolving the conflict. But Putin and Trump get the optics that they like, of course. So that's definitely a victory in Trump's eyes, and definitely for Putin, as he is now just given Russia great power status by being invited to the United States for a summit without European leaders or Zelensky there. But again, we should be relatively positive. U.S. weapons support is going to continue. Those sales, they said, no matter what happens with these meetings, U.S. sales to Europe are going to continue. Sanctions are going to continue. Trump, I highly doubt, would use the political capital to try to actually go against Europe and Ukraine and the rest of the Western world in support of Putin and try to get sanctions off, particularly when Putin isn't offering anything. So I think we should take Trump at his word yesterday that the hope here is that if something does come of it, it would be Trump being annoyed, being seen as maybe upstaged by Putin, and so then he escalates sanctions perhaps. So let's see. There is also the very, I think it's unlikely, but it's worth mentioning, possibility that Putin would maybe agree to some sort of deal that is offered. I say this because that would be the rational, logical choice. Putin, frankly, should have taken the deal that was offered to him a few months ago. The fact that he didn't then, and that he continues to, as he sees it, win on the ground, win in the air battle over Ukraine. I doubt that Putin would change his mind suddenly now and take some sort of ceasefire deal and stop the fighting. Though I think that would be the most astute move for him politically and militarily. I don't think that would happen. But again, we should consider all potential scenarios, and that's not a non-negligible scenario. That would be the most rational choice, but I don't think just because it's rational that it will occur. I mentioned the U.S.-EU trade deal, again, major event of the past month here. What's very important here is that you just again lower the hostile language, the rhetoric that we've seen, particularly out of Washington D.C. towards Europe, and just more solidify that partnership. Very beneficial, of course, for Ukraine then as a result. And then it's worth mentioning again very briefly, pressures are mounting in Russia itself. So Putin again should be incentivized to try to get to some sort of deal. But in short, pressures, economic pressures, and political pressures. We've seen several very prominent officials commit suicide, die, however you want to describe, falling out windows and things like this. But we've seen an uptick in that. Just in the last month, 3 officials died. The political pressures are rising as the economic pressures are rising. The cannibalistic competition amongst Russia's elites for a diminishing share of a diminishing economic pie is just going to make things much more intense amid heightened political repression. And this is only going to continue and intensify. The problem is in Ukraine, we also have a lot of pressures here. So I'll get into that, but just a quick comment. The major event being the largest protests in Ukraine since the onset of the full-scale invasion in 2022. Proof that Ukraine, frankly, is a vibrant democracy, even during times of war. A major, major mistake, irreparable, permanent stain on Zelensky and Ukraine's investment environment, unfortunately, by trying to sort of control and I guess nullify the effectiveness of the 2 primary independent anti-corruption bodies here in the country, and then quickly reverting back. It's good Zelensky backed down, but of course the damage is done. And unfortunately, that only serves Putin's interests. It shows to Putin, again, walk into these Alaska talks confident. Ukraine is very unstable domestically. So it's an unfortunate situation, but that's, of course, what happened. I'll leave this up here just for a second, just to, you can see, you've seen these scenarios in the past. Scenario 2, we've increased the likelihood compared to before because we do feel more confident in the U.S. continued support going forward. And then, of course, scenario 1, Russian victory becoming less likely now. So we do see a much stronger supportive U.S. and EU with an increasingly robust Ukraine. So very positive. Again, we'll share these slides with you, so you don't have to necessarily write everything down here. What to watch in the coming months. I won't go through everything here. On the battlefield, I'll let Rasmus get into more detail, but on the battlefield, yes, it's very difficult on the ground. No operational strategic breakthrough by the Russians. It'd be extremely difficult for them to do that because of numerous limitations on their end, despite the weaknesses on the Ukrainian side too. But the concern would be this happening multiple times in the coming months, and Ukraine having to move reserves from other areas, creating weak points in those areas to try to stop the bleeding elsewhere. So this could be a continual process going forward, so something to be paying attention to. In addition, the drone swarms, much higher levels of drones that are coming, and not just drones, missiles as well, but primarily drones, and better, more advanced drones, and with more advanced differing tactics as well. This is quite problematic for Ukraine's air defenses in the coming months. I'm sure we'll talk about this with the speakers, but this is not very encouraging, frankly, for the upcoming fall and winter. Let's see, of course, with the end of the ceasefire talks, how this all develops. Watch oil prices as well. That depends upon the global economy. It depends upon OPEC, how much they raise output. It depends upon U.S. sanctions, what proceeds with the pressure on India and hopefully China going forward. But this will be determinant of course, Russia's ability to finance its war. And then we've seen positive developments with Europe purchasing U.S. defense equipment. That should continue. And then momentum to seize Russia's FX reserves. I won't get into that, but I think there's reason to be more positive in the coming months that we can see that moving in a good direction. I won't go through everything here. Very, very briefly, we've revised down our GDP forecast for this year and next year a bit because we are hearing, unfortunately, from clients, and we are seeing this in the macroeconomic statistics, a bit of a slowdown, a moderation, and almost a stagnation of the economy. This is unfortunate, but it's also just sort of the reality. There are no greater new drivers of growth really looking ahead. We would really need to see a clear ceasefire to see rising investment and increased business and consumer demand. But this summer, we have seen a bit of a moderation actually in business sentiment. And this is what we're hearing from businesses as well. So it's a bit unfortunate. And a lot of that is driven by the very high costs. Inflation accelerated dramatically, well beyond expectations in the first half of this year. A lot of that driven by the high labor costs, but also driven by the much weaker hryvnia against the euro. Amid these trade wars, we are seeing the euro strengthening quite strongly while the dollar is at relatively weak levels. That trend, unfortunately, should continue going forward. With so much trade done with the euro, this unfortunately is going to keep up some of the imported cost pressure when you think Western companies and where they're exposed. That unfortunately is going to drive up your costs, and you'll lose some price competitiveness in the domestic market. Food inflation also is weighing on things because we are seeing a weaker harvest. So that's hurting exports, which of course weakens the macroeconomic position for Ukraine, but also drives up inflation. And lastly, I'll leave you with this. Our survey, our Q2 business survey, still, generally speaking, good results for where we are. 3/4 of companies still confident that they can hit their sales targets for this year, even with the slower growth, so GDP being revised down. 2/3 of companies, though, are quite unfortunately pessimistic about the cost environment and things looking forward. So that, of course, weighs on business demand and consumer demand. 75% of executives still, though, long-term, very optimistic about Ukraine. I think if we ask that question again, hopefully after this summit, maybe we see some more optimism as well. And then the very last point, the second chart here, labor shortages. A major problem, what we've been asking every quarter, asking our business community, if these labor shortages are actually impacting your product portfolio. Are you actually limiting your services because you don't have the manpower to actually produce as you used to? The good news here is that overwhelmingly the answer is still no. But this is something we're monitoring every month, and businesses outside of Ukraine should definitely be aware of, because that would be a very good indicator of where things are going. And as before, if you have not already, please do, of course, subscribe for UBN. You can hit the QR code there, as well as our podcast that we publish every week, speaking with government officials, business leaders here, heads of NGOs, et cetera, et cetera. So with that, I don't see any questions. Happy to take questions, though, so please do type them into the chat. But otherwise, I will then turn it over to Rasmus, please. So Rasmus, I led things off. I didn't go into too much depth on the security issues on land and in the air, so please do provide more of your analysis.
Sure thing, Mark. Thank you. Yeah, you just briefly mentioned a few of our larger observations, but I will go through it briefly as well to make sure that everybody is up to speed and not steal too much time. So over July, Russian forces have made slow but steady gains, and that's particularly in the Pokrovsk and Sumy Oblast. But they're still hampered by strong Ukrainian defenses, mainly fortified position and extensive drone warfare. And that has prevented any major breakthroughs. In Sumy, Russian units have advanced within 20 kilometers of the city before being pushed back, while Ukraine has maintained a small foothold across the border in Kursk. Elsewhere along the front lines, there have been only limited Russian advances near Kupiansk, north of Kharkiv, in parts of Luhansk, with localized fighting continuing around Toretsk, Lyman, Chasiv Yar, Novopavlivka, and parts of Zaporizhzhia. So overall territorial change in July has been minimal, with Russia capturing roughly 180 square miles in July, down from the previous month, according to open sources. So the main challenge or the main difference here is the air domain, where July have seen the most intense aerial campaigns since the start of the war, basically. So we have above 3,500 long-range munitions launched, including a record of 741 weapons in a single day on July 9th. So these coordinated drone missile strike packages have targeted military and logistics hubs, but also increasingly targeted civilian infrastructure. And while Ukraine's air defense have intercepted a lot of these threats, this saturation tactic have managed to cause significant casualties and infrastructure damage. So what is important to conclude here is that that these swarms or massive use of multiple systems in single launches, we have seen that all along since, well, the last year or so, but it hasn't been deliberate. It has only been on few occasions, not as a main tactic, so to speak. So focus is now changing from these smaller, I would say, more simple strikes to these major multi-system launches where you simply overwhelm Ukrainian defenses, air defenses. And targeting have shifted from more sort of energy and military targets onto a more random pattern where it can be way harder to foresee exactly what was targeted and why. On the logistics front, the Black Sea ports remain active, and they have even seen record volumes in July, even though Odessa and Odessa Oblast have been targeted quite widely. Land transport still face delays and higher costs due to damaged infrastructure and border bottlenecks. That was the approximate status at the end of July. So since we released the August monthly with the UBN, we have seen a little bit of a change in Russian tactics. So early August has brought intensified offensive near Dobripilya and faster territorial gains compared to July. And this is sort of, well, it's alongside irregular high-impact strike patterns aimed at stretching the Ukrainian defenses. So we have had this combination of very, very targeted strikes combined with infiltration in smaller sort of sabotage and reconnaissance groups that are trying to sort of map out and take out major Ukrainian fortified position, presumably before sort of major ground operations. But this is a change in tactics, targeting fortifications with heavy artillery and drones, and then infiltration in smaller teams, aiming to do sabotage or reconnaissance before you have major troop movements, or it's usually because of or before major troop movements. So in general, the open sources indicate that this presence of Russian troops is still minimal, and it's right now the main effect is the precision of the strikes designed to destroy defensive position and force civilian evacuations before you do any major ground deployment. Then we have this reportedly preparation of potential new offensives in priority sectors, in which we see Russia transferring roughly 15,000 troops to Zaporizhzhia, 7,000 to Pokrovsk, and 5,000 to Novopavlivka. So we expect these to be the momentum or the downtown created by the summit, or while we wait, we see these units deployed from the northern part of the front to the south and east, and they will most likely, or they're expected to engage in a coming offensive on the backdrop on the summit, depending on how the summit sort of pans out. Then we have airstrikes down in August, meaning that the overnight strike packages this month have been smaller, between 45 and 165 drones and missiles. And it's that we assess to be a pause in the large-scale attacks because of the Alaska summit happening. And then we definitely expect it to resume afterwards, of course, depending on the outcome of it. And finally, we have Kiev, who was back a year ago considered relatively secure after Ukraine sort of managed to protect it in 22, has seen a very sharp escalation in attacks on a general note. So remote targeting incidents doubled compared to 24 in just the first 7 months of 25. So we have seen the number of drone strikes already exceeding last year's total by an approximate quarter. And roughly 1/3 of all strikes in both 2024 and 2025 have caused civilian casualties. But this year's attacks have been far deadlier, with over twice the amount of civilian casualties in the last 3 years combined. So that's a very heavy civilian death toll compared. And that leaves us to not change our heat map at the current moment, because we are seeing a heavy targeting of all population centers, and it is really, really hard to come up with some sort of prediction as to what will be targeted and when, other than if you have Ukrainian population centers and businesses, you have infrastructure, you have military and so on, and then it will be on the Russian target list. And it's just a matter of time when it will be targeted in one of these more massive attacks. All right, I think that's.
I'll just jump in just briefly because there's a couple questions. I'll be very brief, and then we want to turn it over to Nick. So the first question about EU taking Russia's assets, frozen foreign exchange reserves that have been frozen since February 2022. So this has been the question all along. Momentum has been building. I think after the summit, there's already a lot of agreement in the US that this should happen. I think Trump would definitely do the okay on this, and he could lead with the first step by taking the assets that the United States has frozen. So that could be a possibility, but they've also been vocal about using this as a bargaining chip in negotiations with Putin. So that's also delayed things. Let's see. We tend to believe that at some point they're going to take these reserves. They just need sort of the legal avenue to do this, but the political justification, obviously the moral justification is clearly there. Baltic countries striking and Poland striking targets in Russia. I highly, highly, highly doubt that would ever occur, because that would basically justify any Russian militaristic retaliation on those NATO countries, which then means they can invoke Article 5, and then you create a massive political problem for the United States and Western European countries and all the members of NATO, which Putin's twin is on his way to Anchorage. I have no idea. There might be triplets at this point, so it's hard to know exactly who's going. But it's a decent question, and I've seen the conspiracy theories on that as well. In either case, let's move now to Nicholas. Again, thank you very much for joining us. We wanted to bring Nicholas on. Dual use is a hot topic, obviously, but this is about the investment environment in Ukraine. Ukraine has for years been a strong destination for IT investment from the outside, and now in this world, developing of AI and everything in the battlefield, combination of that with the war, we're seeing a clear takeoff in the last 6 months, in particular, from European investors into Ukraine, and related to this dual use area. And this is important to talk about now, because we are setting the foundation, frankly, for the next generation of defense and dual use technologies that are being developed here in Ukraine with European allies. So with that introduction, Nick, again, thank you very much for joining us. And I know for myself, I'm very personally interested to hear what you have to share. So you can take it from here.
Cool. Thank you. Yeah. Nick Hawtin. I'm based up here in Copenhagen. And nobody is more surprised than Denmark to find out the leading role that we're playing in helping Ukraine. It is surreal to show up in Ukraine and not have to explain that Copenhagen isn't in Sweden, Stockholm isn't the capital of Denmark. So lovely. I'm glad you guys know the Danish model. There's a great story behind how it showed up, which is basically that we had nothing left to give, but we did have the company credit card with us in our pocket when the opportunity showed up to use it. Last year, I ran a pilot, a startup program, a 6-month program, basically start to finish, funded with 150,000 euro. The goal was to find 5 interesting companies and help them see if there was a potential for their technology in the defense sector and whether there was capital to help fund the trip. And it turned out there was an overwhelming response, that there was a huge interest in this from the startup community, that instead of 5 companies, we ended up picking 7. We ended up having 6 in the program. Usually when you run a startup program, the companies are early stage. They've raised about 150,000 euros, and they're maybe 1 or 2 years into the development of their technology. We ended up with 6 companies that had all raised over €1 million. And I'm still haven't met anybody that's run a startup program for companies that are that far down their path. Anyway, it was a success. And that then in turn funded what I'm working on now, which is a program for a defense tech. It's a 3-year program. Last year's program was 150,000 euro budget. This one's an 8 million euro budget. 3 years, we're staffing up. We're recruiting 24 companies for a program that starts in January. January, you say? Yeah, January 2026. I know. What's the rush? Anyway, the point behind dual use is that historically, defense has funded jumps in technology. If you look at jets, if you look at rockets, both of those things were kind of hobby things, or they were concepts in 1939. The Gloucester aircraft factory was producing biplanes, wooden wings covered in linen that you painted in 1939. And in 1944, they were fielding squadrons of fighter jets. If you look at penicillin was discovered in 1924, sat on the shelf because it was going to be really expensive to develop until World War II, when the funding showed up. And by the end of 1943, they had enough to treat every Allied soldier that was injured. The internet was funded by DARPA, right? Self-driving cars. Where did they drive around? Out in New Mexico in the early days when the competition was held every year. That competition was held on a U.S. military base. So, having woken up to this, we did the program that we ran last year. And when it comes to Ukraine, there's 2 really important things. And my colleagues elsewhere here in the Nordics, I'll say the Nordics and the Baltics, if you ever get worried about the Italians, basta, don't worry about the Italians. The Nordics and the Baltics, the NBA, we're here, we're ready. Yeah. When everybody else was telling the Baltic republics to slow down, the Danish foreign minister recognized Estonia, and boom, the rest is history. That with Ukraine, I see 2 interesting opportunities. The Estonians, I named the Estonians because the Estonians had a great answer when I asked them, their dual use and their tech people in dual use and defense tech. I said, what's your take on Ukraine? Because here in Denmark, it's a little mixed. And the Estonians were stone-faced. They were like, Ukraine? Yeah, you're either in Ukraine or you're not in defense tech. Cool. That happens to be my take as well. I've been to Ukraine twice. I came down in January. I had heard about how the Ukrainians were developing hardware at the speed of software. And I get that intellectually. I've developed software. I've done agile development techniques. It's the only way to work, in my opinion. Hardware goes incredibly slow, but until I visited a drone factory and saw them doing it, I didn't understand it. That seeing it really, really made the difference. So I say to everybody up here, I say, if you're interested in innovation in this space, the first thing you need to do is get on the train from Warsaw, go to Kyiv, go to Ukraine, go to Lviv, and people are doing that. It turns out you can drive to Lviv from here. Cool. So there are 2 things that I see the Ukrainians doing right now. One is process innovation, and the other is procurement. And these are the really important things for investment. There's a lot of people asking me when it comes to investment or to working with Ukraine is, but what about when the war ends? Then all these drone companies are going to disappear. And I'm like, but what are you not understanding about how quick they develop hardware? Yeah, that if they can produce a new drone every 6 to 8 weeks, they'll come up with something else in 6 to 8 weeks as well. You're talking to the most agile hardware producers on the planet right now. And so while we're focusing on the drones and the robots, the drones and robots are in effect outward expressions of a process innovation that has happened on the inside, that has happened up here in the heads of Ukrainian product developers. A number of reasons why this has happened. One of my personal takes is that I meet an awful lot of software people that are now making hardware. That's one of the reasons. But this process innovation means that these drone companies and these robot manufacturers are going to very quickly transition into the next thing. So I wouldn't worry about investing in a Ukrainian robot or drone manufacturer. If I was interested in investing in that space anywhere on planet Earth, I would invest in Ukraine, because they are the ones that are going to transition the fastest and have the right skill mix. The second interesting thing I see is in procurement. And especially in one point I'll make on procurement, which is that a significant portion of the Ukraine defense budget has been pushed down to the users. And the example I use up here, that I use outside of Ukraine, is I say, imagine if the headmaster of your children's school or the warden of the local prison owned 20% of their budget that they could spend the way they see. That if your headmaster, the headmaster of a children's school, could decide to build a new gym or build a new library because that's what they wanted to spend the money on, they could. That we have optimized and centralized purchasing, procurement in all sectors of government, and more also in the private sector. Six Sigma, for those of you that are old enough to remember that we've centralized all these functions, and that we've taken more and more control. And that the only way to do the agile development that's necessary to survive is to release control. That in the military, for those soldiers out there, this is Auftragstaktik for civilians. Yeah. And so this procurement experiment, or this procurement methodology, this procurement thing that is happening in Ukraine, is just as revolutionary as what's happening with the product development. And that in this space, let's say, there's two big problems that the companies I work with face, right? Is they need money and they need sales, which is another way. So they need capital and they need sales. They need money. It's always money. They're just like teenagers, right? If you want something to grow, you got to give it lots of money. That when it comes to that, some things are moving on the capital side. Where they're not moving outside of Ukraine is on procurement. Your average European Ministry of Defense works in years, and your SME and your startup works in months and weeks. And those two timelines just don't mix. That if I had $1 for every time that a startup or an SME has told me, yeah, we had a visit from the Navy or from the Air Force or from the Army, and they said, wow, it looks amazing. Yeah, we'd love to have it, super positive. And then nothing happened. Yeah, I could solve, I'd be able to buy a couple of Patriots, right? So in this market, there's 32 plus one customers. There's 32 NATO countries, and then there's Ukraine. And in those 32 countries, there are 32 ministries of defense. And for some products, yeah, maybe there's a relevant police or intelligence service customer. But basically, there's 32 customers in defense outside of Ukraine. Inside Ukraine, there's an easy 100 customers, because there's all the different brigades and battalions that have a budget. There's the different bits of the government that have budgets. There's various different NGOs. There's that fellow that kept on buying Bayraktars, Sergei Prin. Anyway, there's a million different customers in Ukraine. And that's just the Ukrainians. Then there's all the people in Ukraine that are adopting the Danish model. So there's governments, there's EU, there's lots of different organizations. So there's lots of customers in Ukraine in this dual use sector. And that money is drawing the startups and the SMEs in. It does raise a couple of issues, though. And things I'll leave you with is that for the companies that are looking to go down there is, how do they engage? How do they avoid getting in the way? Right? There are most of them, the good ones, want to, are adopted the Hippocratic Oath, which is they don't want to mess anything up. So, first, how not to do any harm. 2, how to add value. 3, where to go. Who do you reach out to? Right? Rasmus has been a strong shout out, super. For this. There's a couple of different Danish organizations that have been really useful. There's the usual people we know with Brave One and Lviv and the Iron Group out there. But where to go to first, and how to figure out how Ukraine works. That having been for so long, having stressed for so long over how to get into a European MOD, showing up in Ukraine and figuring out that there's dozens of different customers is just as confusing as trying to figure out how to get into a single customer. So processes and procurement are the big thing that I've seen over the last year and a half as the opportunities in Ukraine, right? The Ukrainian companies think differently and they think faster. They make better decisions, better design, faster design decisions. That there's a procurement opportunity, innovation that's happening in Ukraine that isn't just a good thing for Ukraine. It's the thing that the West has to learn is not just the robots, it's not just the drones, it's not just how products are developed, it's also how products are bought by the MODs. Short example of that, met a company the other day, just at the beginning of the summer, and he was all down in the mouth, the fellow I was talking to, and I said, what's the matter? And he says, we were a finalist in a competition to pick a particular type of drone. I said, yeah, and he says, yeah, and the MOD just called up, they're putting it off till after the summer. And I said, well, they're putting it off like 8 weeks? Yeah, 8-10 weeks. I'm like, well, then they might as well just start over again. He said, exactly. Yeah, so procurement, product development are really big, huge competitive advantages that Ukraine has when it comes to investment. The challenge from coming outside Ukraine is who to engage with. Boom. That's it from me. I saw Rasmus raise his hand.
That's right. Great. Nick, thank you very much for that. Rasmus, did you want to make a comment?
No, it's just a thumbs up.
Oh, okay, good. Again, any questions, please do submit them to the chat. Nick, thank you very much for those words. I think let's just move straight to Deborah, who is going to have, of course, very relevant and direct comments based upon your insights. So, Deborah, happy to turn it over to you now.
Thanks, Mark. And before Deborah starts, I just want to mention that Deborah actually one of the few foreigners who had her feet on the ground for 15 years in Ukraine. She's been doing lots of interesting things in Ukraine, and she's one of the most experienced people in that particular sector. And I think her experience pushed her at some point to be a founder of venture capital Green Flag, because when you have so much experience and so much knowledge, you have to share it with others. And Deborah exactly is dealing with the startups like that, and Deborah has so much to share. Deborah, stage is yours.
Thanks, Andrew. You're making me blush here. Actually, I'd like to do a thanks back to Nick and to the country of Denmark as well, because he's absolutely right. Denmark has done an enormous amount of things supporting Ukraine, both in the tech sector, the Danish model, but I also probably know 6 or 7 just businessmen who are in Ukraine coming down from Denmark on a regular basis, traveling the entire country looking for companies to do joint ventures and partnerships with. So whatever's in your blood up there, we appreciate it. And thank you so much for all you're doing. I'm actually going to tail back to a couple of things that Nick just said, because I can actually answer a couple of questions and then sort of fill out a couple of things. So one, actually back to the entry points to Ukraine, you're actually 100% spot on. And it's really one of the difficult things that I know Western companies who want to come and test their equipment in Ukraine have had problems with. You're absolutely right. Brave One is one of those entry paths. But there's actually 3 units or battalions that are working with companies that want to come in from the outside. It's 3rd Assault Battalion, Azov, and Kharkia. All have specialized groups within the units to work with foreigners who want to bring their equipment in to have it tested. There's a whole process for each of them, but that actually I would also just recommend that you put out there. In terms of being able to sell into Ukraine, nobody's going to sell into Ukraine until it's been tested in Ukraine. One of the biggest things that we have seen consistently is a lot of Western tech, the new commercial tech that is coming in fails from stage 1. It is not that it is bad tech in particular, or in theory, they didn't do anything wrong. What most of Western commercial tech is missing right now is the unbelievable electronic warfare environment that they have to deal with, the GPS denial. And this is actually problems not just for the new tech, but even for a lot of Western traditional military tech, in the context of everybody expects their GPS to work. Everybody expects their radios to work. They expect their phone to work, and they get within 40 kilometers of the front line and nothing works. And, you know, Nick, one of the things you were talking about was kind of the brains. it's not just the brains, it's like the software behind it. And software has really been emerging as one of the differentiators of what we are seeing in terms of how the Ukrainian defense ecosystem continues to build and to grow. And it's not just because they feel like doing updates. I mean, what is happening is the Russians are continuing to up their game, to change tactics, to change everything. And so it is this constant sort of back and forth of what's going on. The Ukrainians are equipped. They're able to do this on the fly with the software. Also, exactly to your point, the hardware continues to change. And I think this is absolutely one of the things that Western partners really need to understand. I have started speaking more to people outside of Ukraine, trying to help them understand. And I do it first and foremost through, so we are let me stop right here. We are a US-based VC fund that is investing in Ukrainian dual-use technology. I am based here in Ukraine. My partner is based in the United States. And over the last year or so, as we have been raising money and bringing LPs into the fund, we have a lot of these conversations. And what is so abundantly clear is people outside of Ukraine have the idea of Ukraine, drones, and that's about where it ends. But when you start really drilling down into the size and the scope and the scale of what is happening here, you understand that most people outside of Ukraine really don't understand. So part of what I am trying to do now is to talk to people outside more and more. And it's not just, hey, buy Ukraine, buy Ukrainian. It's really Western militaries have to absolutely step up their game. There's a lot that has started happening in Europe, the US. A couple months ago, the president put $2 billion line item to spend this year for drones in the United States. But if you look at $2 billion and you look at the average price tag of some of these drones is $500,000, you're buying yourself 4,000 drones. It really is not going to make much of a difference whatsoever. And so, the US has got that going. There's a lot going on in Europe in terms of everybody now understands as the United States is pulling back, they need to up their own capabilities. There is a human tendency to not want to change and to not want to sort of face some of the things that are happening. So if you look at some of the procurements that have started happening in Europe, the Germans just announced 8,500 new APVs, armored personnel vehicles, and tanks. Most of those are not within 60 to 100 kilometers of the front line because they are so vulnerable to the drones that are being used out there. So it is not just the technology. What has happened in Ukraine is an entire paradigm shift. And again, Nick, you touched on some of these points because it's not just, hey, give the guys the drones. The amount of time that goes into people who are using the drones, it's hundreds and hundreds of hours for these soldiers to be able to use the drones. And it's not just them working in tandem. Usually it's teams in that they've got another guy next to them that's working a surveillance drone who is sort of helping guide the smaller attack drones. There is usually a hardware software engineer as part of the team to help with, fixing and changing out the drones, because a lot of the drones that are going out, they all come equipped with standard equipment. But because the electronic warfare is so incredibly heavy, what works up in Kharkiv is not working down in Kherson. So they have to swap out the antenna, they have to swap out the chips, make updates to the software. So this is just a small piece of the kind of things that Nick was talking about, and how iteration is critical to survival. It's not just a, hey, let's roll out the next, FinTech 101 kind of platform. These iterations are happening at a survival-based level. And in the context of that, just continuing to sort of build this ecosystem and drive it forward, that is a lot of the catalyst. Nick, of the points that you touched on, there's only one that I think you missed, because I have like a 4-point thing that I want people to understand about what's happening here. The only thing you missed was price. And again, in Ukraine, if you talk about like the average FPV kamikaze drone, it's about a $500 drone. One of the reasons that the price being a low price point is so critical goes back to one of the other points you made, which is just the absolute saturation, mass proliferation, the number of drones that are being used. You cannot be spending $1,000, $5,000, $10,000 per drone on what they are using at the front. So the West really does need to be taking into consideration the price, absolutely capabilities for procurement, absolutely just the constant iteration, which means you are putting the capability for change in the soldiers' hands. It's not coming closed, packaged out of the factory. The soldiers at the front have to have capabilities to make changes to these drones. And then the last thing, like you said, is also very much procurement. I think one of the things about procurement is it's not even just the process in and of itself that's slow. You have to, 80 years of defense spending in the West has been a handful of primes who work very tightly with governments. Budgets are set years in advance. To your point, they are absolutely not adaptive. They want closed, exquisite, few beautiful systems. And this is not this war anymore at all. And as it, I know I talk to people in Europe and they're like, well, there's not going to be drones in Italy. There's not going to be drones in Portugal. The US also can't fathom, these things happening there. But the problem is that this is also not just Russia fighting like this. We all know that the North Koreans have been sending soldiers in. There are North Koreans working in Russian drone factories. Some of the changes that have been made recently to the Shahad Gerons really are most likely coming with a lot of Chinese support, Chinese chips. When they started flying those, they had sort of 4 chips for navigation and whatnot within the Shaheeds. They're now up to 16 for some of the more sophisticated ones, and that's not even the jet-powered ones. So there is absolutely lessons learned, information going back and forth between China. And so when you think about this new frame of the war that is happening here, it is not isolated, just Russia, Ukraine. This is really, everybody in the world needs to be paying attention to this. Flipping back just to this local ecosystem, I feel like it has been this crazy ride, honor, privilege to be able to work with people of what is happening here. We started this fund back in 2023, and I think I have spent every single day since then either talking to tech companies or talking to the users and the soldiers, understanding what is happening, what are the needs. This is almost impossible. No, the way this has developed, which is soldiers literally relaying needs to this incredible tech ecosystem that was here before the war. They respond, they send things out, it gets tested. Oh, it didn't work for this. They do software updates, they do hardware updates overnight. This is what is happening in Ukraine, is this extraordinary merger of a very driven, very dedicated tech ecosystem working directly with soldiers. Since this is probably not realistic for anybody outside of Ukraine to be able to duplicate, actually, Nick, what you guys are doing in terms of these incubators, bringing soldiers in, bringing as much sort of frontline experience to the companies that are building outside of Ukraine, across Europe, it is critical that they get like soldier input super early in the process and continuously. And then, once you get to an MVP or a minimum viable product point, you need to bring it to Ukraine. And again, it is just because it is so hard to conceive of what the reality is with the electronic warfare from the outside, that the only way to make sure it's going to work is here. And the last thing anybody wants to do is to, have an MOD buy tech that's not going to work in a heavy electronic warfare environment. I actually have just talked very quickly for 10 minutes, and I'd be happy to, I can keep talking, I can stop and answer questions. Are there certain things that are of interest or that I can talk to for everybody from there?
Unless there's other questions from other people. I mean, I think that was excellent and quite comprehensive for the time allotted as well.
Hey, Mark, it's, yeah,
Andrew,
I think that, and we just had a conversation with Deborah the other day, and that's what she says. Like, sometimes our engineers spend quite a lots of time on developing certain technology, and as soon as they launch at the front lines 2 weeks later, Russians adapt to that, and it's at its waste, and they have to start all over again. And this is was Nick also said, and we have a couple of weeks later, yeah, I mean, we have to start over again, because the dynamics the front lines is hard to understand for the Western world that has not, especially for the countries that has not been involved in any military conflicts in the last couple of decades. So they also don't understand how behind they are compared to what Russia is doing right now. And they say, oh, those drones are not going to fly. And but you never know. There is a technology. They can come up with the technology next year when the drone will show up somewhere in Rome or in Milan, and they'll be wondering how come it flew so, thousands of kilometers. And that's the way how the Russian ballistic missiles have the capabilities to fly 12,000 kilometers as well. So people, it seems like, still don't understand what is actually happening in the ground. Another thing, if someone is interested in contacting Deborah, we can please send us an email. We will make the introduction to Deborah, and you can ask questions, or if you're interested in what Deborah is doing and her fund is doing, yeah, please let us know. And same thing with Nick. Yeah, if you guys have questions, please, we'll be happy to introduce you. There is a question, I believe, the Mark was excellent discussion, had a lot within the scene, in Western Europe, massively behind. Follow up, Chris X line evaluation based on financial metrics as with other private equity investments, or are there other factors that are added to them? Can you guys get on that?
I can actually address this. So we do not see what we are doing as a philanthropic fund. All of our LPs are high net worth or family offices, and both Justin and my business partner Justin and I feel very firmly that we can do well on behalf of our LPs by helping Ukrainian companies, do well here. In terms of exits, that's actually a brilliant question, because it is probably not the traditional, path that you would think of startups and taking. We have actually done our models based on probabilities of almost all of the companies being either merging or being acquired in about a 3 to 5 year time frame. Most VC portfolios are 10 years, and actually ours is officially a 10-year fund, but we actually have strong reasons to believe that most of the portfolio companies will probably be acquired within about a 3 to 5 year time period. And we are basing this on the fact that some of them are already getting offers of acquisition, and it's very likely to be at somewhere between 4 to 6x of the early valuations where we are coming in, which leads to your next question on valuations, which is a brilliant question, because this is a relatively new industry. A lot of people are looking to, how valuations are done in Europe or in the United States. If you look at kind of the enormous amounts that have been flying into Palantir and Anduril and Shield AI, their valuations have just skyrocketed. When you put Ukrainian tech up against a lot of the Western tech, believe it or not, the Ukrainian tech continues to perform better. And it is because they are here on the ground. I will do a note to Shield AI, who had brought their technology over from the US. It did not work as expected, and they decided to set up shop in Ukraine to actually build here in Ukraine to understand how to make it work. And I think that in a lot of ways, that is in some really one of the only ways it's going to really start sinking into the West exactly what this new kind of warfare is. Valuations here, $10 million is a nice finger in the wind number that everybody kind of comes up with. What we do is we actually talk them down. We go through, when we invest in a company, we perform a full US level due diligence. So it means we are looking at their product, not just in comparison, how they're performing here, not just soldier feedback. We actually look at them in comparison to comparable Western tech to understand that there's markets out there. We look at the financials, we look at all of the pipeline purchase orders, things like that they have. So it's a somewhat different market from the West, because there's just so little capital floating through this market, and there's so much floating through the US market, which is sort of what is driving a lot of the enormous valuations there. But yes, there are some models that we are doing. It is not PE. We are focusing on very early stage companies. And so it is more along a VC model for valuation than PE.
Hey, there is another question from Maria Repko. What would be pros and conceivable challenges of building Ukraine defense industry into the European technological defense and industrial ecosystem in general? maybe in terms of fiscal impacts, procurement, maybe value chains.
Nick, do you want to take this?
All right. Well, let's see. Where do we start? I mean, all right. Well, back to Deborah's excellent point about how the primes have been filtered into and have taken over. You know, it's the prisoners that took over the prison, and so I mean, there's a reason that big companies buy small companies rather than trying to invent stuff themselves, and so. Yeah, here I just see a massive culture clash. I think the number one thing would be, culture is strategy for breakfast. And the number one challenge would be to try to get, well, I just see on a regular basis, just trying to, for let's say, Western Europeans talking to Eastern Europeans. Whew. And then trying this between like Lockheed Martin, getting along with some of the cool kids that I've met in Kyiv, yet not in a million years would that work, that sure, you could sell the company and then like 50 minutes later, the Ukrainians are like, fuck this, I'm out. And they're out the door and they started another company. So I think it'd be incredibly difficult. I really, really try not to say revolution. I try not to say paradigm shift. I really try to avoid these words. But when I look at the things that I'm seeing, this hardware at the speed of software, the reason I see that as possible is that when I meet a Ukrainian company that's building drones or building sensors for drones or building something interesting, when you ask them what they did before the war, 9 times out of 10, it was something completely different. I was a foot doctor. I was the director of the CEO of Magura, a lawyer. Right. I'm at a drone company. I walk in, they've got the coolest hoodies I've ever seen in my life. And I've worked in tech for 15 years. Right. And what do? I made games. What did you? They turned out there was a guy in the room that actually had built airplanes. I'm like, wow. I was totally surprised. So how do we do this? The thing I think that Europe can show up with is lots and lots of money. And what we can help with is supply chain optimization. What we can help with is here's how you build a factory. Here's how you build a back office. Here's how you office parks. Something completely concrete in Denmark that I've seen that we have is when I was in Kyiv in May, went out with a company in Kyiv to test fly some drones, and we were standing in a farm field in the middle of nowhere. And all I could think as an old soldier was, damn, I'm glad we are here in May and that we're not here in January, because there was nothing. There was nowhere to take a pee. There was nowhere to make a cup of coffee. Most importantly, there was nowhere that if we found something on the drone that wasn't working right, that we could step in out of the rain and fix it. Here in Denmark, we've got an airport that we closed. And like everything in Denmark, it's near the ocean. So the drones can fly around over the water. And yet, because it's an airport, it's got buildings. And what are they building across the street from the airport? They're building an industrial park. So in this industrial park, you'll be able to build modern facilities in a country that isn't currently getting bombed. And when you want to test your drone, you walk across the street, you take off, you walk back. Before your cup of coffee next to your desk is even cooled, sit down and you're inside looking at a big screen as opposed to staring at a laptop, in the front seat of a car. So there are some infrastructure and capital and scaling processes that we can bring. But I really, really hope that we do what happened in America. We're all familiar with the story of Rand Xerox and how their Menlo Park and their development center was in Palo Alto. Cool. How far? It turns out Xerox's headquarters was in New York. Can you get further from New York in the United States of America without going to Hawaii or Alaska? No. So you want to move R&D away. That's the opportunity, I think. But I'd be really surprised if the European primes could work with these Ukrainian startups. Long
Great.
answer.
Yeah, no, but thanks, Nick. Thank you, Deborah. Guys, that was a great discussion. I think we're ready to wrap it up. Please don't forget, we have our live event on September 26th, same place in Parkovy. It's Friday, September 26th. We will be happy to see you. We'll start making announcements in about a week. We also will have another webinar in about 3.5 months between our live events. So we're going to keep you updated on the latest developments in Ukraine. We'll have great speakers. And again, thanks to Danish industry, and thank you, Peter. Thank you, Nicholas. Thank you, Deborah. And thank you, Piraeus Bank, for sponsoring us. This is our friends, partners. Please, if you have any questions, if you need information, Nicholas information or Deborah information, please feel free to reach out to us at any time. Thank you again, guys, and we will see you soon. Thank you. Bye.
Take care. Thanks a lot.